This week on Oasis by the Sea, Pastor Keith teaches Greek to me from the book of John, chapter 12, verses 20 to 32.
I'm going to describe two kinds of people. There are more kinds of people in the world than just two, but today I want to describe two of them. Absolutely certain everyone in the room will have met both of these kinds of people, maybe even been one of these kinds of people. I've been one of these kinds of people. I'll talk about that. Here's the first time. Neither one of these, by the way, are healthy. I'm going to describe two different unhealthy kinds of people. One person, the first category, wants to be like everybody else, whatever that means. They desperately want to be something that they aren't. This used to be me, particularly as a child in primary school. I was a nerd. I did not like being a nerd. I desperately wanted to look like and act like other kids, and that didn't come easy for me. I wanted to own the things that they owned and have the same amount of friends and have the same amount of fun. I'm going to be honest with you, I lied a lot as a kid. I lied because I felt like who I wasn't okay, and so I needed to pretend to be them, but to pretend to be them meant lying. I couldn't honestly be me if I wanted to be them, and so I acted as if I was something I wasn't or someone I wasn't. The motives behind this kind of thing are jealousy, and then when it turns into teasing or mocking or it's not so good, it moves from jealousy to shame. And that's not a healthy place to be. By the way, in time I learned that my life was actually really, really good. My parents weren't abusive. I didn't have to deal with alcoholism. My family actually loved each other. My parents were educated and had sound financial habits. I was actually blessed beyond all measure. I just didn't see that when I was 7. I didn't get it yet. But regardless, my point is that living in shame and jealousy is not a good way to live. And constantly wishing we could be someone else isn't healthy and doesn't make us do healthy things. And on the flip side of that, if we can go all the way to the other side, to another thing that isn't healthy, would be arrogance that turns into blame. There are people who, instead of feeling like they wish they could belong to everyone else, they've come to a point where they believe that they're better than everyone else. They're superior. And because they're superior, if anything bad happens, it must be their fault because I'm superior. I'm the good one. I'm the smart one. I'm the put-together one. So if it all goes bad, it must be someone else's fault. The anger generally gets aimed at a category of people. The people whose fault it is that things have gone wrong. The category can be color. It can be black people or white people or brown people or an ethnic group, Japanese, Mexicans, Indonesians, whatever. It can be a religious group. Catholics and Protestants tried to kill each other for generations in Ireland. I'm sure that no matter what went bad, the Catholics thought it was the Protestants' fault, and the Protestants thought it was Catholics' fault, and the blame just perpetuated forever. It could even be an educational or social status. Poor people don't trust rich people. Rich people think poor people are the problem. Educated people think it's because of the uneducated, and the uneducated don't trust the educated because they think they're manipulative. And we put people in categories, and we decide that they're the problem. It's their fault. But the outcome is always the same. Instead of addressing a problem, we find someone to blame. And then instead of fixing problems or addressing issues, because we don't know how, we just go after retribution and revenge, because we definitely know how to do that. So why did I just spend 3 pages of notes talking about those two kinds of people? Well, because this is going to come up in the passage we're going to read today. And it's also characteristic of the Jewish people. The Bible is a record of the Jewish people. All of it is pretty much a record of Jewish people. Not very much of it is about anybody who isn't Jewish. In the first half, the part we call the Old Testament, the Jewish people were generally in the insecure, jealous side of the equation. A lot. In fact, almost every time the Jews in the Old Testament got in trouble, it was because they were jealous of what those countries got to do. The people who worshiped those gods, that seemed more fun. Something else seemed better on the other side, and they wanted to be like them, and then in the process of wanting to be like them, that's where they tripped up. That's where they made their mistakes. Ironically, the Jewish people and I have a lot in common in that regard. Both of us might have thought we had it bad, but the truth of it is we were totally blessed. We just didn't get it. And then by the time we get to the end of Jewish history, Ezra, Nehemiah, those books start to get to the end of the ancient history part, and it seems like the Jewish people are turning a corner and identifying themselves more strongly, and maybe they're over that. Then we got the 700-year kind of gap, and then we pick up with the New Testament. And suddenly the Jewish people have flipped from the first category of person to the second category of person, and all those Greeks are bad. We're Jewish and we're superior. Everything's their fault. If they would just get out of our face, if they would just get out of our way, everything could be better. They were bitter about Roman influence, and they had a cosmic-sized superiority complex. Essentially, to be Jewish was to be God's chosen people, and everybody else was not God's chosen people, and that was bad. That attitude is going to be a major problem in what we look at today. We've been in the book of John. It's an account written by one of Jesus' closest followers, John. Chronologically, in the life of Jesus, we're extremely close to the end of his time on earth. Jesus will die less than a week from the point we're going to read today, maybe even as close as 2 or 3 days. And during this week, Jesus teaches and answers questions publicly to a crowd. It's the week of a festival called Passover. It's an extremely important Jewish holiday, and tons of people have gathered to listen to him and ask questions. He's been publicly accessible to everybody, and here's what happens in the midst of this. We're in John chapter 12, verses 20 through 20, total of 20 to 20. Let's look at the first couple, John 12, 20 to 22. Now there were certain Greeks among those who were going up to worship at the feast. These therefore came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and began to ask him, saying, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip came and told Andrew. Andrew and Philip came, and they told Jesus. Okay, doesn't sound too weird until we start to break it down. I actually eventually found this whole thing to be a little bit comic. First off, all kinds of people that were Jewish are walking right up to Jesus and answering their questions. These people think they have to ask permission. There's a categorically different position they're coming from. They're saying, "Mother, may I?" Why are they doing that? Because Greeks in Jewish culture weren't allowed to do anything. They weren't allowed in the temple. They weren't allowed in the synagogue. They weren't allowed to do this. They weren't allowed to do that. They were excluded. But it says they'd specifically come because they were interested in worship. These were Greek people who had seen what the Jewish God was like, and they went, actually, we want to hear more of that. We're interested in that. We're curious about that. But then they come into the culture, and they're like, no, you're a filthy Greek person. And they're used to it. They're used to being stiff-armed. They're used to being told, you can't come here. You don't belong here. This isn't your place. Get out. And so instead of just walking right up to Jesus in the crowd like everybody else is doing, they're asking permission. That's interesting. And why did they ask Philip? And why mention where Philip is from? Okay, these are the things that they tweak my brain, because I'm a nerd. Not one other time in the entire book of John does John mention where a disciple was from. Not one time, ever. He's already introduced Philip. That happened in the first chapter. Didn't mention that he was from Bethsaida there. So why, in the middle of all this, towards the end of the life, does John make a point of saying Philip and where Philip was from? That's weird. That detail. Why even mention that? Well, here's why. First off, Philip is a Greek name, as opposed to, say, Jesus, which is definitely Jewish. Most of the disciples had good Jewish names. The good Jewish boys would have. Philip had a Greek name. In Bethsaida, I've talked about the geography of the time before, but Judea was like the official Jewish country, and then you had Samaria, and then above that was a settlement called Galilee, where a bunch more Jewish people lived. And if you went to the very north of that, just as you started to quit being Jewish and be Greek, that's where Bethsaida was. Philip would have been the most approachable of the 12 disciples. He had a Greek name. Maybe his accent said, "Oh, you know Greek, or you speak the way we do." Or maybe his mannerism, something about living in a place so close to Greekness had made him the most approachable of the 12 disciples for these Greeks who felt odd and off and unsure. And so they come to Philip because Philip seems the most familiar out of the choices available. And of course, what does Philip do? He says, no, don't worry about it, guys. Come right up. Come talk to Jesus. Is that what happens? And that's what should have happened. What should have happened is when Philip should have said, you want to talk to Jesus? Come right up. Whoop. No, he goes to talk to Andrew. Why? He's not sure. Do we let Greek people talk to Jesus? That's not what the rest of us do. That's not what Jewish people do. Jewish people don't let Greek people come up and just talk to your rabbi. What do we do, Andrew? And Andrew goes, no, just tell him to come see Jesus. No, that's not what Andrew does either, right? He goes, okay, you and me will go ask Jesus if this is okay. Is it okay for Greek people to come talk to you, Jesus? That's the question. And in a way, it's a horrible question. It's horrible that they even thought they needed to ask this question, yet nevertheless, this is where they're at. They feel as if they have to ask permission for Greek people to come talk to Jesus. It's a problem. It's an attitude problem. It's a heart problem. You know, sometimes we take the disciples of Jesus and we elevate them a little higher than we should. Look, they were people with regular people problems, including prejudice. So, here's where we're at. So what does Jesus say? I want to tell you that in typical Jesus fashion, before I even read this, it appears on the surface that he doesn't even answer their question. Now, he's going to answer their question. We have to be patient. But Jesus often, when he was confronted with something that was silly, he, instead of just answering the silly question, he would often drive to the heart of what caused the silly question. He would respond and teach and correct and try to fix what was broken that caused the question in the first place. And that's what's going to happen here. So first, Jesus is going to fix some things, and then he is going to answer the question. I promise you he's going to answer their question, but we're going to have to get through the other part first, okay? But it's going to seem at first that Jesus isn't really answering. Here we go. Jesus answered them, saying, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains by itself alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. He who loves his life loses it, and he who hates his life in this world shall keep it to life eternal. If anyone serves me, let him follow me. And where I am, there shall my servant also be. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. What is Jesus doing here? What is he trying to address? Where is he going with this? Because this doesn't seem to have anything to do with the can Greek people come see you issue. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with it at all, but it will. Hang in there. First, he's once again, and I've lost count of how many times just in John alone, that Jesus has predicted his own death. This whole thing about the grain of wheat needing to fall and then die, and then it produces much. He's saying, I need to die. And then, just like with that seed goes in the ground, but then a life comes up, and I'm going to die, but then a life is going to come up, and there's going to be a huge harvest because I need to die. So he's just symbolically talking one more time, again, about the fact he's going to need to die, he's going to raise again, it's going to be very, very cool, life is going to come from it. So he's doing that. He's also addressing their disease, the disease of the nationalistic hatred and distrust of the Greek people. And the cause of that disease. The cause of that disease, the anger and blame, deciding that the Greeks are responsible for all their problems, and so they're justified in hating them. I mean, isn't that where prejudice really comes from? Prejudice really comes from deciding that somebody else, their very existence, is what ruins my life, and so therefore I'm justified in hating them because they're my problem. If just they would go away, maybe everything would be better. This is a serious problem. A Jew would be standing in front of Jesus right now. These Greeks are still on the outside hoping for a chance to see Jesus. Keeping people from Jesus is a serious problem. If our attitude about people is such that our attitude would keep people from seeing Jesus, that is a serious problem. I have been guilty of it. I have a hard time with certain kinds of problems. I have been overly harsh. I have had to ask forgiveness. I have been there. I have done this. And it's still a serious problem. So, Jesus is addressing their disease rather than just answering their question. Next slide. Jesus is countering a blaming lifestyle with an alternative serving lifestyle. See, there's problems in the world, and what the Jews were doing is saying there's problems in the world, let's blame someone for that. And Jesus is saying there's problems in the world, go serve. There's problems in the world, so I'm going to die for it and rise again. I'm going to do something. There's problems in the world, and so I serve people. There's problems in the world, and I'm inviting you, Jesus says, into serving me. I'm inviting you into serving with me. I'm inviting you that instead of blaming other people for the problems to be part of the solution to the problems. That's what I'm inviting you into. He's replacing, there's a problem, it's your fault, to there's a problem and I can do something. That's what he's inviting them into. You cannot serve someone and be prejudiced against them at the same time. Those don't work. In other discussions, Jesus has made it clear and will continue to make it clear that serving him means serving other people. Jesus is going to die in service to others. You know, I want us to understand how unfair that really is. Leading into the holidays, we here in Exmouth, we have a community page. And we put up the church services of all the different churches up, and it's in one place, and it's there for everybody to see, and we put that up. And somebody sarcastically this year threw up something like this as a comment under that schedule. Easter, the time of year when we all pretend that it's a sacrifice to die when you know full well you're going to get it back up again. I'm sure the author of that comment thought they were very clever. I imagine they saw that as like a mic drop moment. Like, see that? Poof. Uncounterable, bro. It sounded smug, and I'm sure it was. And let me be the first to say that there is some truth in that thought. Do I live different because I know that my death is temporary and that I'm going to live forever with Christ? It better. It should. Do I see risk differently? I hope so. Do I have a different peace about the idea of one of my children dying when they're still young because I know I'm going to see them again and we're going to spend eternity together, and so they missed a few years here on this broken earth, but we still have eternity together. Does it change my perceived way I would react to them dying in their 20s and 30s instead of just feeling like, oh no, what a tragedy, they've lost everything, to, I'm going to see you again soon? It better make a difference. It should make a difference. Did Jesus know he would rise again? Yes, he did. So was it a sacrifice? Yes, it was. About 20 years ago, a little bit over 20 years, there was a movie produced called The Passion. I don't know if you've seen it before. Whether you like the producer or not, or I don't care any of those things. What The Passion did really, really, really well is it did a great job of depicting the physical impact on Christ on the way to the cross. It did that very, very well. It did it so well that you should not show it to your children. Because as the Bible says, before Jesus even made it to the cross, he was so mangled you couldn't tell who the actor was anymore. You couldn't tell from the beginning of the movie who that actor was. It could have been most anybody up there. He was so beaten and crushed and ruined and wrecked that he was destroyed to the point you could barely tell who the guy was. Because that's accurate. Because that's what did happen to Jesus on the way to the cross. It wasn't that he peacefully fell asleep and died, and then 3 days later peacefully got up and lived. You're right, that wouldn't be much of a sacrifice. That's not what happened. What actually happened made that callous remark ignorant and childish. Jesus spent hours suspended on spikes put through his arms. And every breath he had to choose between suffocating, because the way it pulled down kept him from being able to breathe. So every single breath he had a choice. I'm going to either quit breathing, or I'm going to lift against those spikes and purposefully hurt myself so I can get one more breath. He did that for 6 hours. It's easy to mock something when we oversimplify it, when we don't care to see the details. And it's in that future context that we must hold as we read the next few lines. Let's read what Jesus says that he knows is coming. This is John 12, 27 through 28. Now my soul has become troubled. No joke. He knows what's coming. It is not pretty or easy. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. That's sarcasm if you haven't picked that up. But for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. There came therefore a voice out of heaven. I have both glorified it and will glorify it again. My soul has become troubled. He knows what's coming and he doesn't like it. Who would? And in this moment he doesn't like, he has choices. He addresses those. He says, what shall I say? How should I respond? There's a slide for that. Jesus' response models the attitude we need. See, if we went back to those first two people I described, the way that we often respond to tragedy, if he'd been the first person and been jealous, God, why me? Why do I have to do this? The rest of these people don't have to go through this. Why is your plan for me to receive that kind of punishment? Why me? He could have gone that way. Would have ruined everything. Why do I have to do this? Why can't I be like them? It isn't fair. Jesus sarcastically poses the question, should I ask the Father to save me from this? Should I ask the Father why should I have to do this? Why not somebody else? Should I ask that question? The answer is no. Or what if he'd gone the arrogant blaming path? What if Jesus had looked around himself and said, all of you are to blame for this. It's your fault. You do it. It's you, not me. In his case, he even would have been right. But he does neither. He neither jealously gropes for a release from his task, nor does he shift the blame on anyone else. He knows he isn't guilty. He knows he doesn't deserve this, yet he serves anyway. He serves people who need help. And that's what Jesus talks about next. Let's look at verses 30 and 31. Let's start in verse 29. So there was this voice in heaven, right? And the multitude, therefore, who stood by and heard it, they were saying that it thundered. And others were saying that an angel had spoken to him. And Jesus answered and said, this voice has not come for my sake, but for your sakes. Now judgment is upon this world. Now the ruler of this world shall be cast out. A voice had come from heaven, right? That's a little different. It doesn't happen a lot in Scripture. Despite the clear words, some can't believe it. They decided to believe that it's thunder. Like, even though it's clearly words coming from the sky, like, thunder. Yeah. Too weird for it to be words, so thunder. Other people get it that it's words. They know it's words, and they give it to an angel. An angel is talking to Jesus. And then that's their thought. Their thought isn't the angel is talking to me. The thought is the angel is talking to Jesus. It's always easier to think God's talking to someone else, isn't it? It's very uncomfortable to think God's talking to me and that God wants me to respond in a specific way. Way easier to push it all over the place. Jesus points out the obvious. He did not need to hear that. Jesus already was hearing from the Father just fine. He didn't need extra loud, out loud voice talk to hear from the Father. It was the people around him that were not listening to the Father. It was the people around him that were deaf. It was the people around him who didn't understand. And so God, because of their sake, to bless them, speaks in a way they can hear. It wasn't as if Jesus didn't know what the Father thought. It was compassion to put that voice in the air for the multitude to hear. One more clear chance for people to believe. One more opportunity for people to trust that this is really the guy. One more sign to the multitude to say, this is the Messiah. This is the person you're supposed to trust in. This is it. It is just God's absolute compassion to provide one more reason to believe. And then Jesus says, judgment has come. What does that mean? Well, at that point, it meant that judgment was coming, and Jesus was going to take it. Jesus absorbed the judgment I deserved. That's what's going to be happening on the cross. The judgment I deserved was landing squarely on Jesus. Judgment was coming, and it should have come from me, and yet somehow it lands on Jesus instead of me. That's what's going on in the next just few days. And that's what the core of what it means to be a Christian is. That's why we talked about that at communion. This is what it means. To be a Christian is to understand that I was going to get judged, and Jesus stepped in the way, and he says, I'll be judged instead, and I'll take what you were owed. Not going to church, not adopting a specific set of rules. The heart of Christianity is understanding that every drop of judgment we deserved went to Jesus instead, and now we live gratefully. And then understanding that the previous ruler of the world, Satan, lost everything, that the Jesus won everything. When Jesus died and rose from the grave, all the power that Satan had, because you know what power Satan has? His power is to accuse us and say, you're a mess, you've made mistakes, so when bad things happen, you deserve it. That's the power of Satan. The power of Satan is you don't deserve heaven. You know you don't deserve it. You've thought wrong things. You've done wrong. You've lost your temper. You've done stuff that you're ashamed of. You don't deserve that. And when Jesus went to the cross, he killed every argument Satan had. That's what's going on. That's why the ruler of the world who was Satan at the time, was dethroned because all of his power just went through the floor. It was gone. And now after all of this, Jesus is finally going to answer the original question. And if I be lifted up from the earth, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. There's the answer to the question about the Greeks. There it is. The question is, why aren't they here already? I am for everybody. I'm for everybody. All colors, all ethnic groups, all backgrounds, all education levels, all financial levels, all government models, all philosophical perspectives, regardless of how you were raised, everyone is invited equally. Everyone. And there's a multitude around Jesus right now. That's what we just read. But that multitude is excluding a people group. There's a multitude, and there's a people who can't get in. They can't get into the amoeba, the crowd, the whatever. It's big. There's lots of them, but there's a people who can't breach the edge. There's no reason why the Greeks shouldn't be allowed to join him. His disciples are still wrestling with their blame and judgment. Jesus is not. We're going to stop here a second. Let's go to the next slide. Christianity is about Jesus taking the judgment of all kinds of people. If you've ever felt judged by Christians, and let's be honest, I have felt judged by Christians from time to time. Please know that people are people. They have problems. Jesus' disciples had problems. Right here, there's proof that the disciples had problems. Jesus did not have problems. Becoming a Christian isn't about believing that all Christians are right or even liking what all Christians do. It's about believing in what Jesus did. It's in knowing that he did the right thing. It's a trust in an actually perfect person, knowing that all the other people are imperfect people. Jesus has not judged us as unworthy to approach him. Maybe somebody else has. Jesus hasn't. Every single person is just as important to Jesus as anyone else. Judgment came and landed on him. And that is what Jesus is offering. So if you're here and you're wrestling with all of these questions of who this is and what this is about, this is what Jesus is offering. Will you let him take your judgment so that you can walk free? That's the heart of the Christian message. Number two, we've obviously had an opportunity here to check how Christ-like our attitude is doing. Are we struggling with jealousy and shame? Have we slid into yearning to be everyone else? Have we decided that taking up our own cross and following him is just too high of a cost? It's too hard to make a difference, so I'm just going to try to fit in instead. It doesn't work. We end up lying to ourselves and others. We have been transformed. We are to be a light. Jesus said, what good is salt if it loses its saltiness, or light if you cover it with a basket? We're supposed to be us. We are us. It makes us different. It makes us a little weird. Maybe even Christian nerds. I don't know who you are, but we don't need to be everyone else. We need to be us. And when we start to feel jealous about what everyone else has, we're on a bad path. We don't need undercover Christians trying desperately to act like there's somebody else. Or maybe we've slid the other way into arrogance and blame. More and more have we come to the conclusion that we're better than everyone else. Have we lost our humility? Do we look around at the world and see brokenness and blame all the bad people, whoever those bad people might be? Have we forgotten that we are forgiven? Have we forgotten that the mission is not to blame anyone or to figure out whose fault it is? The mission of the church is to save as many as possible before we leave the planet. It's not to figure out whose fault it is. It doesn't matter. The mission is to rescue as many as we possibly can before it all goes down. That's it. It doesn't matter who's at fault. It continues to be the mission to seek and save everyone we might. But the thing is, no one attempts to rescue a person that they want to take revenge on. No one attempts to rescue the person who they think caused all their problems. And when we get to a point that we think that person caused all my problems, and the last thing I'm going to try to do is try to share good news with them about how they can be rescued from all their problems, we don't want to be Philip and Andrew, hesitant to bring someone to Jesus, not sure if they're good enough, not sure whether this is the sort of person that should be coming into church with us or that Jesus should hear about. We need to get all that garbage out of our head. We want, as soon as someone says, can Can you show me Jesus? Yes. Yes, I can. Right this way. Let's talk right now. If we want to be like Jesus, that would be a fantastic place to start. Let's pray.
You've been listening to Oasis by the Sea. Thank you so much for joining us today. May God richly bless you until we see you next week at the Oasis.